and civil nuclear power. So with that, I'm sorry to gas on. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you, Mohammed, and take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stu. It's very difficult to moderate a conversation when you have, first of all, the president of your organization is such an amazing speaker like Stu, and you also have Michael Ratney and Ali Tolba, both who are extremely charismatic and very informative gentlemen. So I'm extremely happy to have both of them with us. And Ali, I know that you just jumped in a cab coming from the Kennedy Center from the US-Saudi Business Forum, so I really appreciate that. Few things to say here. Stu and I went out for lunch a few months ago, and we were talking about the Middle East, and I told him, I'm kind of the creature of the new Middle East. And he said, what do you mean? I said, there's two Middle East. There's old Middle East, there's new Middle East. The old Middle East is basically captures all the headlines of the New York Times, the Washington Post. It's all the things that you know about, all the things that have defined the relationship between the United States and the Middle East for the past, I would say, 80 years. It's all about energy, it's all about security, it's all about conversations around normalization. But there's a new Middle East. This is a new Middle East that I would say started to emerge in the past 10 years around digital transformation that you are seeing, 5G questions in the Gulf aspirations to be a hub for AI clusters. They're building gigawatts of clusters, something that's unthinkable, or they're working with the United States, with NASA on a space program, or they're trying to sign an agreement around critical minerals. So clearly you are seeing different technical aspects of the relationship that emerged, but they're always under discussed, always marginal, always seen as vanity projects. You always try to tell people there's something really real there, but the accusation as well, Mohammed, you're an Arab man, of course you're biased, whatever you're talking about. But truly, when you have the Crown Prince here in Washington, and the fundamentals of the conversation, like Stu said, is about US-Saudi partnership on AI infrastructure. So you're going to see a lot of details emerging around sale of chips to the AI venture Humane, or the kingdom trying to be a force multiplier for our own problem with critical minerals. As people know, we're speaking about 90% of processing of critical minerals taking place in China, and we have a big problem securing our own supply chain, or working with the Saudis on a civilian nuclear program, and finally, the very idea that we're thinking about them as a logistic hub in the Middle East that can connect South Asia to Europe. So clearly the relationship is fundamentally has changed. And today, this story is becoming fully into view. And I couldn't have asked for two wonderful speakers like Ali and Ambassador Ratney to be joining me today. And with that, I have a few questions for both of them, just to make sure that the conversation started. After that, we'll open the conversation to the public. It's much more dynamic. I'm very happy to get your questions, even though I would really appreciate the questions about the new Middle East, the new Saudi relationship. And with that, I'm gonna go to the gentleman to my right, and Ambassador Ratney. First of all, welcome to MEI.
Left.
I'm sorry.
You're left.
Well, thank you for that. See, I have a seven-month-old baby, so I guess this is affecting me. Well, welcome to MEI. You are
not to throw you off.
You kind of did. You are our last man in Riyadh. You finished a fantastic tenure in Riyadh, and I want you to give us your helicopter view of where the relationship was when you arrived to Riyadh a few years ago, where the relationship is today. How do you see the trip in light of all these new announcements that we're seeing about technologies and critical minerals?
Sure, that's a lot. I was lucky. I got to Saudi Arabia at the beginning of 2023, and I think the relationship had already reached a low point. So it's nothing better than to kind of take over an embassy at that point, because it can only get better. If you recall, the relationship in the Biden administration had its ups and downs. It was not great at the beginning. It was freighted with the kind of rhetoric from the electoral campaign from then candidate Biden regarding the Crown Prince, and a lot of baggage politically in the United States about the relationship with Saudi Arabia. It got better. The president actually visited Jeddah in 2022, and then it got worse again over a big blow up over oil production levels. And it was in that moment where the conversation started about how do we right this ship? You know, it's sort of a relationship in some sense that's too big to fail. And in there was the conversation about the possibility of a mutual defense treaty and Saudi normalization with Israel. It became very interesting, quiet, but very interesting. I got there just after that conversation had started. And it's interesting because for a lot of Saudis, that the U.S.-Saudi relationship is just, you know, it's part of their kind of DNA, especially that generation of Saudis that went to college in the United States. Their whole frame of reference is whether it's a political or commercial or security relationship, it's with the U.S. And by the time I got there and it was clear that things were getting better, I think both people around President Biden at the time and people around the Crown Prince were determined to make that happen. You talk to Saudis, especially of that generation that really knows us, and it was like, I joke, it was like their parents had decided to patch it up and not get a divorce. They were truly concerned that there was a fundamental rupture in the relationship, and they were incredibly relieved that that was not going to happen. Over the course of my tenure there, it seemed to get better and better. To be honest, there was never much warmth between President Biden and the Crown Prince. That was sort of a fact of life. But I think on both sides, there were a lot of pragmatic folks that saw the value of the relationship and saw a way to kind of chart a way forward, including something that could have been at the time quite path-breaking if it had worked out, which was this idea of Saudi-Israel normalization and a mutual defense treaty between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. So it was getting better. By the end of the Biden administration, I think it was in a pretty good place. The Trump administration, I think, wasn't going to do anything, certainly nothing that would damage the relationship. If anything, and you kind of saw this on display yesterday, you add into that positive trajectory this almost exaggerated warmth in the relationship between President Trump and MBS. And you know, the Saudis were sort of showered with gifts in a sense between kind of military agreement and agreement on export of chips and so forth, 10 or 15 different MOUs that were signed. So you really have the sense that it's in an extremely good place right now. And that's good for us, right? And I know, and I had this sense because I was doing a lot of media interviews yesterday, and you can kind of tell from the tenor of questions that we would get that there are still a lot of concerns kind of more broadly once you get out of the Washington ecosystem about the substance of the relationship. But I have to say, my sense is like everything that's been happening has been good for the United States. Leave it to the Saudis to judge whether it's good for them. But I think whether it's broadening the commercial relationship beyond just defense and energy into things like high technology, strategic minerals, even other things that were never really a part of the relationship before, you know, technology, artificial intelligence, tourism and hospitality, art and culture, a whole range of things that were never really figured in to the U.S.-Saudi relationship now do. I think that's all for the good. I think having a partner like the Saudis, and to be honest, like the Emiratis and others that have the investable capital to help kind of deploy the technology of artificial intelligence at scale in a way that few other places do, I think that's good for U.S. tech. Having a willing and enthusiastic partner for the U.S. military, I think is good. Middle East is kind of no less complicated than it's ever been. And as much as a lot of the things that the Saudis got over the course of this visit were cast as things that they wanted, I kind of look at it, I think it's good for us too, right? The Saudis want credible, reliable, predictable partner for their military. You know, we want the same thing for our military. The Saudis want reliable supplies of the most advanced chips. We want reliable partners to deploy those chips. The Saudis want partners in renewable, including nuclear energy. We also want those things. Like, it's good for our industry. It's good for our national security. So I think all pretty positive, I have to say. You know, the next period, we could talk a little bit about this. Saudi is still obviously extraordinarily dependent on oil revenue to kind of fuel all of this domestic transformation that they're in the midst of. Things, you know, you have oil in the mid-60s. It's probably not where they would like it to be. And so you see a bit of that in the slowdown in some of those mega projects that they've been undertaking and some of the other things where U.S. companies have been bidding on tenders there. So there is a risk that even while they're trying to transition away from oil, they're still largely dependent on oil revenue. And so that creates risks for us. But I think all told, like better that we be there with them working on this than sort of on the outside watching what they're doing.
Building on that, we should give credit to the American commercial diplomats and companies during the low points of the U.S.-Saudi relationship. I would say I happen to be in Saudi Arabia, living there or between Washington and Jeddah, Saudi Arabia for 2 years. My wife was based there. And one of the things that you have been seeing is when the channels or diplomatic channels between Riyadh and Washington broke down, the American tech companies were at the forefront trying to sustain that relationship. And I would say kept it alive until we ended up right now in 2025 having these sort of conversations around AI buildup and making sure that the Saudis are getting what they need from AI chips. So with this going to Ali just came, and again, thank you for coming from the US-Saudi Business Forum. I'm not sure how we're going to go back because I know the area is completely locked down. So really appreciate you. I mean, give us the headlines. I mean, what did you hear there? What did you hear from American companies? Are these MOUs will be real deals? Give us a sense if we were in the room with you in the forum.
Well, first off, I should thank you for the invitation to be here. That's my first time on an MEI stage, and it is an honor to be invited and participate, and doubly so to be doing so alongside Ambassador Ratney, who has been such an effective envoy and diplomat advocate on behalf of the American people in Riyadh and on behalf of American companies. Again, a pleasure to be here. I think what's going on at the forum right now as we speak is a physical embodiment of the kind of spirit, the upgrading of the relationship, the deepening of ties, and particularly the kind of trajectory in terms of sectors that Ambassador Ratney was just talking about. Now, just to peel back the curtain a little bit on how U.S. companies involve themselves in these, more often than not, they are thinking about how do we lean into this experience? How do we get some yield from the executives that are participating in this? And so it's a great venue for stakeholder engagement. It's a great venue for positioning, for advertising your intentions for the marketplace, and making announcements like the ones that you're talking about. In terms of the signals that are actually being received, it's usually very thematic and trying to get a sense of what are the priorities of, in this case, the Saudi government. What are they trying to advertise as the direction of travel for the relationship? And it's for that reason that I think the signal that's being sent very clearly is in what they've chosen to make part of the programming. The sectors that Michael just talked about. Sure, they have the traditional sectors of construction, of energy, of financial services. Even those are talked about in significantly innovative ways, really demonstrating how Saudi wants to lead on integrating AI and advanced technology in those sectors. But they were the Ministry of Investment, very thoughtful and careful about how they programmed these sessions to really demonstrate, to give American executives a sense of what are the priorities going forward, where do they think the opportunities are, and you can see, and I don't mean to be overly facile about this, but it's very common for businesses to look around and say, who else is participating and at what level? And so numbers matter, participation matters, levels matter, and there's been such an overwhelming response from the American business community in participating in this forum. Likewise, the Saudi side has really flooded the zone. I mean, they really brought a massive delegation, and I don't mean to be overly reliant on that one data point, but it was a very intentional signal to tell the American government and the U.S. private sector that, and this goes back to, again, what Ambassador Ratney said, America, despite great power competition, China and others really trying to project economic influence and be competitors against U.S. companies, that American companies are still very much the partner of choice. Absolutely the first port of call for doing business in the kingdom for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is American companies are partners and builders. And that is very much on display. Maybe one final thing that I think is important to highlight that doesn't really get talked about very much, and maybe it's me being more of a sociologist than an analyst. In the conversations that I've been having with members of the delegation, from mid-level to senior level over the last couple of days, it's really remarkable the level of enthusiasm and optimism, energy that they have for this visit, for the agenda, for the upgrade of the relationship, for the deliverables that were being announced both last night and broadly, and then much more specific today. Sure, some of that energy is simply because this is a phenomenal trip with a lot of pageantry. Sure, some of it is because of it's the United States, and if you accept what I just said about the U.S. being a partner, there is enthusiasm for the opportunities that are available, that are on offer if we can drive these partnerships forward. But it's pretty clear to me that it's a little bit more than that, that there's an additional element. And it's pride in the progress that's been made as a part of what's happened so far with Vision 2030. You don't need a trip to the United States to feel proud about what progress has already been made in economic and social transformation. Anybody that has been in Riyadh or in the kingdom lately in the last year or two really gets that sense in spades. But there's something about this visit here, the Crown Prince coming to the White House, having the visit with the president, and having the spate of announcements that I think really is a bit of an endorsement. I don't want to say a watershed event, but it's a mile marker where all of these folks, the officials who have been working so diligently, tirelessly for years, the Saudi people who have, a lot of the transformation has not been easy because of the structural reforms, the unwinding of subsidies, the addition of the VAT. It really is a checkpoint where I think that they're looking around and saying, we've accomplished something, and this is underscoring that and something to be celebrated.
So before I speak about and ask you questions to both of you about specific industries, I want to still ask you a question about what were the industries that you focused on in your career as a commercial diplomat 10 years ago and in 2025? Like, what were the top 3 industries of interest for American companies in Saudi Arabia in 2015? And what are those industries in 2025? And tell us more about the gap.
Well, I've got 2 reactions to that question. The first is to answer it very directly. The work that we did on behalf of U.S. companies 10 years ago, if you looked at it, I'm sure it ran the gamut. It would be what you would expect. It was financial services and insurance and energy and aerospace, defense, FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, retail, and I could kind of go through the list. I think we're still doing a lot of that work today. I think that still forms a firm foundation. Of course, now getting to the answer the first part of your question, we're working on advanced tech, all parts of the AI value chain. So that's infrastructure, that's data, that's chips, that's suppliers to the data centers, that's at the app layer, it's the hyperscalers. I think we've done work in each of those areas very, very recently. And you can say the same thing about biotech and innovative medicine, kind of cell and gene therapies that you wouldn't have thought would be, well, by finishing that sentence, I'll give away a little bit of what I want to kind of hammer on. Entertainment, doing a fair amount of entertainment work. And who would have thought that 10 years ago? So it's kind of what we were doing before, but in different incarnations and a lot of new sectors, which we could get into if we wanted to. But what I really wanted to, my reaction to your question is less about the sectors, and it's a bit more about, well, what we're actually doing, the problem set. What are these companies asking a strategic advisor to do? And that has changed even more fundamentally. And I think you can extrapolate some lessons or some analysis of what's going on in the kingdom because of what those actual things are. Once upon a time, and we'll have a different panel about what in the world the strategic advisor does, but once upon a time, the most common thing that people would bring to someone like me is a problem. We're already in country, something has gone wrong. Can you help us think about how to correct it so that we can get back to alignment on whatever it is the issue is? That was the vast majority of what we work on in somewhere like the kingdom. That's changed. It's not so much about we have a problem, it's much more about, hey, there's an opportunity. We think that there's something to be done here that's meaningful to the, sure, maybe it's entering into the market, but even more so, it's something that moves the needle for us beyond just the kingdom, that actually is an entry point into the region and maybe even something that has a global nature to it. I don't think I'm overstating it by saying there's 3 or 4 things that have been brought to me, so I get into sectors, over the last 4 years that was described either explicitly or could be described as a moonshot, as something that is significant, global, meaningful for a Fortune 500 company, and Saudi is the place where they want to start that with partnership. And we can have a conversation about what those are and why Saudi makes sense for those places. But that's something that wouldn't have existed before. And just to kind of maybe just wrap up, once upon a time, 10 years ago, it was much more about selling into the market. And this is a little bit of an analog to what I just said, but now it's a lot more about how do we align with the priorities? How do we partner with the government or entities here so we can build something together? So it's a lot less about, hey, can you help us find the right distributor so that we can just ship product in, sell it, and take the revenue? It's a lot less about that. And the reason I think that's worth pointing out is because it really underscores how serious the kingdom has become about development, about using investment to catalyze sectors, about how to create a sustainable economy. Because if you continue to just ship product in, that's revenue in, but it's not building the any particular ecosystem, it's not growing the Saudi economy, you're not accomplishing the objective of diversifying, creating engines of growth that didn't exist before. And so that's why it's a new function, a new problem set of what we're working on, but it actually says something not only about the market, but about the intentionality of the government.
I'll be sector specific here. And let's talk about, usually we start with AI infrastructure when we talk about the Gulf and specifically Saudi Arabia, the clusters. And of course, we're going to be talking about the AI clusters. But I want to start with critical minerals. One of the most interesting thing that we're seeing is how critical minerals becoming very much central to American foreign policy. So it became very central to the US-Australia dynamics. It's something that the previous administration, the Biden administration, the Trump administration have been thinking about this very expansively in terms of how they should think about our partnerships, our relationship with countries like Indonesia, like Chile. And clearly you're seeing much more pivot towards Saudi Arabia from that sort of length. So my question to you, Ambassador Ratney, I mean, you were there during that change. You have seen some of those MOUs. Also to give people context, during President Trump's visit back in May, we have an MOU between MP Material, a critical mineral company here in California, and Ma'aden, which is the Saudi minerals company. So, I mean, give us the big picture. I mean, why Saudi is important in terms of critical minerals? What does it mean in terms of our needs in this sector? And I'm going to, of course, ask you a China question, but that will be after. How do you see about Saudi itself from a critical minerals standpoint?
Sure. I guess one of the things that happens when you're a country with vast oil wealth and you're sort of wholly dependent on that as your natural resource is you don't develop other resources that you have. And there's 2 big ones that the Saudis themselves say they never developed. One is their human resources, and they're working on that. And the other is their mineral resources. And it's interesting to think about it. The Saudis feel like they have vast untapped mineral resources that they've just never bothered to develop because they didn't need to. And you hear Saudis talk about minerals as sort of the next generation. If oil was their natural resource wealth of the first, whatever, 80 years, minerals is the future. And minerals will continue to be in demand even if there's a tapering off of demand for fossil fuels. So for them, it's this vast untapped wealth. And the more they look into it, and I take them at their word, the more they look into it, the more they have. Uranium is the one that people think about because they've talked about it most frequently in terms of trying to develop a civil nuclear program, but they have vast mineral wealth in other areas as well, and they have ambitions to invest elsewhere in the world in development of mining and minerals. They started hosting, everybody knows Future Investment Initiative and that big conference. That big conference historically has been around investment sort of. A lot of people go to that conference in order to get close to the PIF because they see that as a source of investable capital in the financial sector principally. They started also hosting a Future Minerals Forum, which in a way started out in a much more modest fashion, kind of around Saudi's own mineral ambitions. And it very quickly became a global conference, not just about Saudi Arabia, but about mining and minerals everywhere. And it became kind of a remarkable thing because it put Saudi Arabia, their own strategic minerals ambitions, at the center of what has become kind of a global obsession with this because of the link between minerals and tech. And so I think it positions Saudi extraordinarily well for this, both as a place where companies will want to invest in order to help them develop their own mineral resources, but also Saudi partnership globally in exploiting mineral resources elsewhere in the world. And just to cut to your China question, like that's absolutely a part of it. I don't think the Saudis would publicly want to cast it as somehow addressing our concerns about global competition with China, but it doesn't stop us from thinking in those terms. And certainly Africa is the most obvious example, right? The Chinese have extraordinarily predatory practices throughout Africa, extracting minerals and leaving often impoverishment in their wake. And the answer is, so who else is going to do that, right? These countries are poor and they're going to want a partner to help exploit their natural resources. If we and a country like Saudi Arabia could do that in place of the Chinese, better for us. It provides us with access to strategic minerals that fuel our own tech ambitions. It gives us a reliable partner, and it gives, frankly, the Africans a more credible partner than the Chinese.
To build on that, so just a few numbers to give you a flavor about what we're dealing with when it comes to critical minerals. So China mines almost 65% of critical minerals and process almost 85% of critical minerals. And in response to our own export controls on chips, the Chinese replicated that model, you would argue, that they are imposing export controls on critical minerals or products that include Chinese mined or processed critical minerals. So clearly we're entered a situation where the chips for minerals dynamic between us and the Chinese. And of course, that was part of the big trade conversation between Beijing and Washington. And right now we have some sort of bandwidth in terms of timelines because we were able to reach an agreement, at least this administration was able to. But building on what Ambassador Rani said, how can you diversify? How can you look for countries that are willing to be that sort of hub in the middle for geographical reasons, for energy reasons, and for capital reasons, and clearly Saudi at the forefront. In 2014, they estimated that they have $1.2 trillion of critical minerals. In 2025, we're speaking about $2.5 trillion. This is based on new exploration, new surveys of the Saudi landscape. So clearly, this is a big issue for the Saudi leadership from political economy standpoint, from a cash flow standpoint. So I'm going to ask you about the second part of, or the second industry, which is AI. Since you already answered the China question, I'm going to ask you about AI. One of the main pillars of this new US-Saudi relationship is how Saudi Arabia could be a hub for compute as a service for other markets. Think about East Africa, South Asia, countries that frankly do not have the cash to fund the capital to build data center or the energy, or let alone the hyperscaler relationship to build that sort of enterprise layer. You have seen that. You have seen all these companies coming to you in Riyadh, asking for your support as a US ambassador. I mean, how feasible that is? Is this feasible? Is this real? And in a best case scenario, what does it mean for American tech policy?
To me, what's stunning is how quickly this has emerged, right? I got there at the beginning of 2023. Saudi Arabia had tech ambitions. You didn't hear that much about artificial intelligence at that point. And then you heard only about artificial intelligence. It became, and you could tell at the leadership level, the #1 priority. And my sense is with Mohammed bin Salman's visit to Washington this week, there's a lot of things he would like out of this visit. An agreement on reliable exports of the most advanced US chip technology is probably #1. That's my sense. I think big US companies, principally Google, Microsoft, AWS, and so forth, looked very quickly at a country like Saudi Arabia as a place that could deploy this technology at scale quickly. So they had investable capital and ambition. They had cheap energy. These data centers are extraordinarily hungry for energy. They had large swaths of relatively unregulated land on which you can build these data centers. They have a comparative advantage, to be sure. They and a few other countries, Kuwait does, the UAE, a few other countries, and U.S. companies were clearly keen to partner with them very quickly. The key is whether the Saudis or the hyperscalers that are building in Saudi Arabia can be deemed reliable partners such that the U.S. is prepared to export these chips on a regular basis. Now, I will tell you that the Biden administration in its sort of last year or so was struggling with this issue. Should we export the most advanced chips? To whom, under what circumstances, what sort of export control or use control regime needs to be in place? And they never got across the finish line by the end of the administration. The expectation was that the Trump administration would do it with a more sort of, I don't know, mercantilist approach to US exports. But it's taken them a long time as well to get their mind around this because you have some of the same internal debates about exports of these technologies. And you have the whole range of views. You have folks that feel like these are the crown jewels. If we export them, they fall into the hands of the Chinese and we lose our comparative advantage and we have potential security breaches. And there's others that argue, unless you find reliable partners that are able to deploy this technology at scale with US tech, it's going to drive the innovation in China that we're trying to compete against. And somewhere in there is the answer. They seem to have reached some agreement on this visit, although I don't think they're going to publish the actual MOU, so I'm not totally clear what the substance of the agreement was with the Saudis that was done this week. But clearly, the sense is that it's going to move the ball down the field for these US hyperscalers operating in the kingdom. Look, I think it's good for us, right? We need reliable partners that have the investable capital, the cheap energy, the land on which to build these. Better that we find those partners and address any concerns that we might have about security, export controls, and so forth, rather than kind of leave US industry on their own, unable to find those sorts of partners. The Saudis, in my experience when I was there, this was all new to them, right? They didn't really have export control regimes for anything at that point, with the exception of water. That gives you an idea of their sort of natural resource mindset from generations earlier. And their pitch to us was, let us know what we need to do. Right? There was zero resistance. They understood that we saw deployment of this technology, not just in economic terms, but in security terms, and they wanted to be prepared to address that. The last thing I would address is, what that looks like, what that potentially looks like. About a year and a half ago, this idea of IMEC, the India Middle East Economic Corridor, that would basically originally the idea is to take goods from the Indian subcontinent through the Arabian Peninsula, through the Middle East, including Israel, and then to Europe. Basically an alternative to the sea route that takes goods almost exclusively through the Suez Canal. And so there was an economic argument to be made. There was interest from India, even though the Indians don't like to cast it in terms of an alternative to Belt and Road Initiative. We certainly saw it that way and continue to. There was interest from the Gulf, from the Emirates, from Saudi, in creating this alternative trade route. And the Saudis looked at that and they said, great, but we don't just want to be a pass-through for somebody else's goods that are being imported from the subcontinent. This can be used for other things. The Saudis have ambitions to be producers and exporters of green hydrogen. You could use the same infrastructure routes to export green hydrogen, and they want to be a net exporter of data. They see creation of these data centers as an export commodity. And they feel that they are it's probably right, sort of geographically positioned between the Indian subcontinent, Europe, and Africa, perfectly positioned to be not just a hub or a transit point, but an actual exporter of data using some of the same infrastructure. Again, I think it makes economic sense. Ultimately, it's going to depend upon whether there is a kind of predictable, transparent, reliable export control regime from the United States that allows these companies to make these investments.
Well, to insert myself back in the conversation, to know more about the India-Malaysia corridor, I highly recommend my book, West Asia, that's coming out in February 2nd, and it has the endorsement of our dear leader, Ambassador Stu Jones. So
Autographed copies are available on the table as you leave.
Nice plug.
So,
Modest markup.
so Ali, critical minerals, AI, I mean, there's even more stuff to talk about when it comes to space. The Saudis are signatory to the Artemis Accords. They're working with NASA. We can talk about the EV partnership, Lucid Motors partnership with PIF. Clearly, there are so many new aspects of the relationship that we see across completely new industries. But the question is, what's the misconception about Saudi Arabia from US policymakers? What exactly is the gap for American policymakers and bureaucracy to take this relationship forward?
The gap is a lower than optimal appreciation for everything that Ambassador Ratney was just underscoring, in understanding that these partnerships are in America's strategic interest. Actually, let me take that back. I think, rewind the tape a few years ago, as you had said, AI and critical minerals was not on the national security radar, broadly speaking, on policymakers' radar, the way that it is today. I think we are at a moment where clearly there is common appreciation on both of those sectors that on AI, the diffusion of and adoption, global adoption of the AI tech stack is in America's national security interest, and that building up the kind of supply chain on the rare earth critical minerals front is also imperative, partially because of its interplay with AI, and also because of the weaponization from China. As a result, it is entering into the national security, vital national security interest conversation. What I think is lagging is the recognition that Saudi Arabia has a natural place as a partner in building that coalition on both of those fronts in that regard. So it is easy to, if you're not deep in the weeds on this, and I think policymakers are kind of warming up to it, it's easy to think that these partnership agreements might be done just because of the desire to deepen the relationship or because of the close ties that we have. I think what's missing is the understanding that we absolutely need these kinds of partnerships, and that Saudi Arabia, because of its ability to deploy capital, its geographic position, its focus on extractive industries, on its cheap power, on the ability to organize the cost structure on both extraction and processing of metals and minerals, as well as the ability to build these data centers and manufacture intelligence. They have a comparative advantage. So for both of those reasons, not only is the partnership a natural one to establish, but it's one that has internal coherence and economic, not only viability, but sustainability. And I will just end on this. I was speaking with a member of the delegation about one of these areas, and they've been involved very much in the conversation. And this was exactly the question that they asked me. The White House and those leading the conversation on chips and on metals and minerals, they clearly understand this. Why doesn't more of Washington understand this? Because it has limited the amount of political space, and it has increased that's been available to them to actually drive these negotiations forward. and it has been a challenge. However, from what I understand from talking with the delegation, we have progress, specific progress and announcement on both of these fronts forthcoming in a couple of hours.
That's great.
So let's say we're going to be working with Saudi Arabia on AI infrastructure. They're going to be one of our main partners for critical minerals, equally important as Australia. Let's say we're going to be working with them on space exploration and try to bring Saudi cash flow into the U.S. economy. So what does it mean for the question of China? I mean, if you're going to be working with them on so many strategic industries that core to American foreign policy in the next 20 years, what does it mean in terms of the Saudi relationship with China? Is this going to be a constraint? Are we going to have guardrails? Is this going to be always a point of tension? Meaning, just to give people context, we have two issues that are extremely tied to China. The question of CVS, and there's the idea of clearing Saudi investment in American assets. And let's be frank here, no one really wants to buy old legacy assets from the 20th century. People are interested in chip designing companies and new technologies. And the second thing is you have to work with the interagency process, specifically with commerce around chip sale to the kingdom. And like Ambassador Rani said, this is not like a one-time sale. This is we're going to be negotiating deal after deal to implement every part of it. So what does it mean? Walk us through that. You were the ambassador in Riyadh. You managed some of those aspects.
I mean, thinking about America's competition with China is a global issue. Every diplomat at every U.S. embassy all over the world is charged with thinking about that, no less in a place like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Chinese have ambitions in the Gulf region, to be sure, just like we do. And we have to think in a pretty clear-eyed sense about what that means for us. You know, talking to Saudis, it's pretty clear we can't begrudge them a strong commercial relationship with the Chinese. China is their largest purchaser of oil, major customer. As far as the Saudi kind of global view, they see themselves kind of geographically at the center of this multipolar world, and they want to take advantage of it. They're between China and India and Europe and Africa and the United States, and they feel like they're perfectly positioned to take the best of all of those things. And they've historically had a good relationship with China. And they would say to us, America, you have a pretty good relationship commercially with China, right? You sell them your debt and you buy plastic lawn furniture, right? It's kind of the basis of the US economy. Where's the rub? The rub is with the most sensitive technologies. And this is something where just merits constant conversations with our partners, whether they're Saudi partners or elsewhere in the world. What does that mean in practice? The conversations were most frequent when it came to defense technology. Saudi doesn't want to totally give up on some sort of a strategic relationship with China. They would be quick to remind us that it's nothing like the relationship with the United States, where we have deployed US military personnel in the kingdom, long-standing history of buying the best US defense articles they can get, exercises with the US and so forth. Nothing like it, but nonetheless, they're a big country, they're an important country. China's an important party, and they're going to have those relationships. We just have to be pretty clear-eyed about what it means in terms of sharing with them our most sensitive military technology and just reminding them. And they're open to those conversations. You hear the conversation associated with the F-35, which was discussed just yesterday, right? So the president wants to sell F-35s to Saudi Arabia. It would be a major sale for Lockheed Martin and all the other companies that participate in that production. What's the criticism? The criticism is it could expose the most sensitive US technology to leakage into China. You have a country like Saudi that says, okay, tell us what we need to do. Like, how do we avoid that? It's not like we don't have time, given the lead time to produce these things. And it's not like you don't have a willing partner on the part of the Saudis to try to address some of those concerns. The same with AI. You know, the concerns tend to be if we sell the most advanced chips to Saudi Arabia, who uses them, what export controls are in place. The Saudi view is, tell us what we need to do. You got time. With AI, you have much less time than an F-35 because the timeline for these data centers is now, not 5 or 10 years from now. And so, in a sense, a country like Saudi Arabia is never going to want to publicly articulate the reason they're doing these things in terms of America's concerns about China, because they feel like they have to maintain a relationship with them. But what they'll tell us is they understand America has concerns about China. And that might involve them disentangling themselves in terms of some tech or some contractual arrangements that they've gotten in order to satisfy those. Because the thing that I think sometimes a lot of policymakers don't understand, and even a lot of business leaders in the US, is the degree to which the Saudis want to anchor their commercial ambitions in the United States. They want to anchor their defense and security concerns in the United States. They understand that there's other partners. They understand they're in this multipolar world, but far and away, whether it's because of a kind of educational experience here or a kind of social affinity for the US, that's where they want to be. And it means we have an opportunity to help address those concerns before someone else comes along and tells them they've got a better deal.
This is a warning. I'm going to ask Ali one final question, and I'm going to open it to all of you. So be ready, raise your hand, and my colleagues will make sure to give you the mic. So Ali, a lot of MOUs. I feel like whenever we have a Trump trip to the kingdom or the Crown Prince here in Washington, we have tens of MOUs that being signed. What's the delta between the MOU and the actual deals, and why?
Well, I think the answer is implementation, but maybe before I talk about the why of the implementation, it's worth underscoring. I mean, there's one Saudi minister whose identity I will protect, but Michael, you might know exactly what I'm talking about. I think I've been in 3 different roundtables over the years where he has said, "I hate MOUs. I hate." And I mean, he's being a little bit flippant because at the same time, of course, this is a key economic deliverable. But what he means by that is they are too often driven by political timelines. They are too often not fully thought through and rationalized because of the need to put forward something that is a declaration of intent. And of course, as a result of that, expectations get elevated. So 90% of the congenital problems that you see with implementation came because of a misalignment going into the actual execution of the MOU. And then once you get past that event, well, then you start getting into the details and you find out that there's all kinds of, again, misalignments on capital deployment and contributions, on structure, on governance, on timelines. And it's really easy for those MOUs to not move forward. It becomes a challenge then, and that's often because of work that wasn't done on the front end. And that's a bridgeable gap, but it takes focus. It takes a forcing mechanism, and very often that's not necessarily there. There are some defense and security, some aerospace contracts between the United States and the kingdom that have famously still not consummated in the way after many years that was anticipated, simply because there hasn't been that kind of a drive to bridge particular gaps in the execution of them. So that's kind of the problem. What's required, in my opinion, is both governments to actually get more involved and lean forward in making sure that they push forward the implementation and help bridge those gaps that the two parties often have difficulty doing on their own.
Well, with that, questions. I have so many questions no one has. Wow, okay. The gentleman over here.
Yes.
Actually, hold on 1 second. Your name, affiliation, and your question briefly.
Thank you very much. My name is John Lysenring. I'm with J&J Real News, and we're Unfiltered News. I want to thank you, Mohammed, for your great organization here, the Middle East Institute, and what the type of forums that you're putting on like today. It's fantastic for information sharing and for greater knowledge of various nations. So thank you very much. And thank you to the panelists for coming today. 2 quick questions. Ambassador Ratney, you had mentioned that there's an almost exaggerated degree of warmth between the Saudis and the United States. I'm wondering if you could expand on that.
You'd have to ask the protagonists in that drama, I think. For whatever reason, President Trump seems to like Mohammed bin Salman and like vice versa. So you tell me.
Well, the reason I asked the question is, it seems like, you know, there's a song by Tom Petty, "It Was Too Good to Be True," which is a great song, by the way. plug for Tom Petty and not just your book. But I honestly believe that from what I'm seeing, and you folks are the experts, that it's not just going well, but I'm not going to say almost too well, but if you contrast it with the previous organizations, it seems as if Saudi is all in. Would you agree? I mean, what do you see? Let me take the other tack. What do you just see as possible problems or what's not going well?
You know, maybe what's sometimes not appreciated is the degree to which Saudi Arabia wants to anchor its strategic future in the United States, right? There's lots of like wrinkles in the relationship, to be sure. It's a complicated relationship, but that's basically where they want to end up. And I think they probably see in these meetings this week and the reception that they're getting from the president, kind of a willing participant in that. It was on that same trajectory, even from the Biden administration, frankly. Maybe some of the warmth in the relationship was missing, but clearly the trajectory was there, strategically, commercially, culturally. And this administration has picked up on that. And clearly, I think the message to the Saudis is you got a willing partner here in Washington.
Great.
I want to be respectful of other hands. So how about we still have one question? If we have time at the end, I'll go back to you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Please.
Thank you. Sam Dagger with Bloomberg News. Obviously, a lot of pomp and circumstance and warm feelings during the visit of the Crown Prince, and obviously a lot of big aspirations in the U.S.-Saudi relationship. But it seems like implementing many of the MOUs and frameworks and even the cooperation agreement on defense, nuclear, AI, all the other things were announced yesterday into something more concrete. I mean, the implementation you just talked about, that would actually endure past this administration even, right? Has gotten a lot more complicated because, I mean, we have the spotlight back on the Khashoggi affair. We have the human rights record again being talked about. I mean, that was like on the front pages of all the major dailies today. Obviously, we had the photos, but then the headlines said something else. And Israel and its allies here in the U.S. Have deep concerns, I mean, over what they see as big concessions are being made by the Trump administration to the Crown Prince. And even the Crown Prince's, you know, what the Crown Prince would want to give Trump in return for this relationship, normalization with Israel and joining the Abraham Accords, has gotten even a lot more complicated. Even before the Crown Prince arrived in D.C., you had Netanyahu come out and say, no way, no Palestinian statehood, not even a pathway to Palestinian statehood. I mean, that's what the Saudis want, an irreversible pathway, and they see it through the Gaza peace plan. So how do you see all of that? I mean, obviously, to Ambassador Ratney and Ali as well. Thank you.
You want to take it first?
You go first.
By
all means.
Well, first off, Sam, good to see you again after Manama. You didn't ask that one in Manama. I mean, a couple of thoughts come to mind. First off, there is a fundamental strategic alignment between the national security interests of the United States, both the traditional ones and the ones that are evolving that we've talked about, and the direction that Saudi Arabia wants to go, and how MBS views both his country and the region. And I'll go so far as to say the way that Israel, generally speaking, sees the region as well, which is why for quite some time behind the curtains, there has been an immense openness to that normalization process. I don't think that any of recent events and recent political volatility or some of the things that you raised call any of that into question. I think you still have that kind of fundamental strategic alignment. And the Crown Prince's visit here, I think, is meant to underscore and hopefully advance, solidify a fair amount of that alignment and really bring it out on the front of the stage, as opposed to being something that's been working in the background for just for a little while. On the human rights question, obviously, there's been a dissonance between the United States and Saudi on their human rights record, but Saudi would say that they've made immense progress on a number of fronts. Of course, female inclusion and women's empowerment, of course, on immigrant rights and worker rights, which they are incredibly focused on making additional improvements on, because they understand that with the Expo coming and with World Cup coming, that there's going to be even greater scrutiny on that question. Well, I'll stop maybe with those two. What else did I forget and leave out from the question? Oh, I'm sorry, on the MOUs, on the details on the MOUs. If we had only the announcements that we had yesterday, then I would say there's what we have is a statement of intentionality and a direction of travel, and now comes nothing but a vast universe of questions and work to be done on implementation and actually operationalizing them. But even today, I've been advised that there's a lot more work that has been done on specifics. Some of it was announced yesterday, and we've got specifics on a number of fronts, particularly on minerals, particularly on AI. I think the president probably went about as far as he's going to go on F-35 yesterday, but I've been told that there are more announcements coming, and even beyond what's being announced, there's a lot of good progress that represents forward movement and working towards specifics on all these fronts.
Ambassador Riding, anything to add?
Just, you asked about the longevity of these agreements, right? We live in a political world, right? So you do what's possible. I think Saudi Arabia obviously would like a mutual defense treaty. That's something that would require Senate ratification. That's probably not going to happen outside kind of the grand deal involving normalization, which isn't in the cards right now. Absent that, what do? You try to find the best possible agreement within the power of the administration to execute, and it lasts as long as it lasts. Some of these things, including technology, it's impossible to say how long these agreements will be valid, because you don't know how long the technology itself is going to be valid. So you do what you can, I think, and then you step back and you look at the trajectory of the relationship, and it's been consistently better from about the midway point of the Biden administration, certainly through to now, and there's no reason to think it's not going to continue in that direction.
Wonderful. One question to one speaker. Please be brief as much as possible. Over there. Wait for the mic.
Hi, thanks, gentlemen. Ann Perrin with Temasek. I co-lead our Middle East practice and globally run geopolitics for the firm.
I'm
So-
sorry, with which?
Temasek investment firm. So my question, Ali, is supposedly for you, I guess, but I'd love to hear, Ambassador, your reaction too about, this is very exciting, and I went to the summit in the spring, and it was all very exciting, and there's a lot of momentum happening, and it's all the things you've addressed and the underlying things are all just very positive momentum. But what I look at is the execution and the structural risks that I want to dig into a little bit. Perhaps if you could address how US companies are thinking about this. When I look at this, I think about the giga projects, Vision 2030, execution risks, bottlenecks, talent shortages, infrastructure drain. I mean, there's a lot there to look at from a risk component for particularly US companies, since we're speaking from that lens. How are you advising companies that are going in? I mean, because we want to see capital flows both ways. We want to see it coming into the US, but they want to see it coming into there. How, if you're advising a company coming in, how do they manage for this risk? Because it's real, and if you're really pulling up the hood, you're seeing it.
Ali?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the question. What we usually get are the questions of political risk, of regional security risk, of internal stability risk. And we typically give all of those very low probabilities of risk. You really go to the heart of the matter, which is the implementation and the execution, which is usually what we highlight as being the thing that companies, deal teams really need to think through. And there's no easy way around that. And if any Saudi cabinet minister who touches this was on the stage with us, they would say, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right that we have, in order to realize the vision broadly, to transform the economy more narrowly, and to execute against any of these initiatives, the biggest challenge we have is having the human capital and the institutions and the process to drive everything forward in a way that's both effective and along the timelines for investment horizons and deliveries that these projects require. There's no real good answer to that other than going in as eyes wide open and then bringing in the various resources needed to try and mitigate against that. I think the one mistake that somebody might make is not thinking that through and thinking that the execution would be as smooth and simple as it would be in another market. The kingdom, again, is working on creating a more talented professional workforce. They've made immense strides in that regard, but they would be the first people to say that they still have a lot of gap to make up there, and that's why they're focused so much on education, workforce training, and finding ways to supplement and partner, supplement that effort and partner with countries like the United States that come in with operational excellence and train up the people so that they can be more capable going forward.
Over there. One question, one speaker, brief.
Actually, one question, but about two issues, Emirates and Syria and Saudi Arabia. Now, Washington keen to calibrate its relation with Saudi Arabia and Israel. To what extent this is going to be applied when we are talking about United Arab Emirates and when we are talking about Syria, especially and historically, geopolitically, Syria is used and still, how can I say it? It's the horizon of Saudi strategic growing towards the future.
It's a question about the old Middle East. Ambassador
Yes.
Rani, you want to respond to that?
If I understand the question, so Saudi Arabia is in this very inward-looking period, right? Their priority is not shaping the region; it's transforming their own country, and they look at the region as a potential disturbance of that because they're surrounded by conflicts, right? Yemen, Sudan, Syria for the longest time, Gaza for the last 2 years, and I think their whole goal is. I think they're sort of realistic about the possibility of resolving these conflicts. And their goal is to try to de-escalate them, have them do as little damage as possible, and keep them away from the ambitions that Saudi's trying to execute on internally. Syria is a good example, right? Syria, like the United States, was in some cases obviously supporting the Syrian opposition for years, prolonging the war, that ultimately they came to regard as just a net negative for the region. Refugee flows, influx of jihadis and Iranian proxy forces, destruction, people getting killed. And basically, Assad was still there. Even before Assad was overthrown at the end of last year, I think most in the region had decided it's time to move on from this model of stoking conflict in a way that's just going to kind of work to the detriment of the entire region. Once Assad was gone, you have a guy there in Ahmed al-Shara who's imperfect and has clearly a problematic background. But I think the Saudis saw, rather than try to prolong the conflict, let's see if we can make of this leader in this country some modicum of stability. And he's persuaded President Trump of that. Erdogan helped as well. But essentially he said, look, we can't pick Syria's leader at this point. This guy has an imperfect background. But nothing's going to get better unless we engage with him, if we let the economy breathe, if we can kind of bring him in. Not an uncontroversial thing, given his background and the views of many Syrian minorities about this guy's background. But nonetheless, that was the Saudi view. De-escalate, engage, let the economy breathe, make them a part of the region. And he persuaded President Trump of that rather handily, to the point where President Trump met Ahmed al-Shara in Riyadh and then invited him to the Oval Office just a few months later. I think it was a wise move, but it was also kind of a piece with the way the Saudis are looking at the region right now.
Well, from that side, maybe, please, over there.
Sure. Sorry. Ken Close, I'm also a strategic advisor. I run a company called Quincy Group. I'm curious if the defense cooperation agreement that's been offered is actually going to help American and American companies do business in Saudi Arabia? Because you get on the ground and you're actually practicing and you're trying to get something done. A Chinese company comes in and underbids you by 40 or 50%. No anchoring of the relationship, no education in America can get around the procurement rules that face a decision maker when they're faced with that. Even in the case of data centers and extraction of rare earth, you could argue the Chinese are more competitive. So is there any talk about mechanisms going to be put in place that somehow are going to change the nature of how things are purchased in Saudi Arabia so that actual American companies benefit in the light of the fact that we've given them a defense cooperation agreement?
Give us the strategic view and you can give us the tactical step by step.
So I don't know what the text says of the agreement. I'd love to read it. If you have a copy, would you just email that to me, mratney@fastmail.com? I will tell you this, especially when it comes to defense acquisitions, and I heard the entire litany of Saudi frustrations with working with the U.S. defense industry, whether it's the industry itself or the U.S. Congress or the administration, you name it. I heard it all. Their frustrations typically weren't centered on price. So the idea that there's going to be a tender and China's going to come in and underbid, I think the Saudis are fairly wise to both the quality differential, but also the risks that places on our strategic partnership, the U.S.-Saudi military partnership, if they go kind of wholeheartedly into Chinese acquisitions. They're wise to that. They're wise to the quality issue. Their frustrations tended not to be over price. They tended to be over long and unpredictable supply chains problems with U.S. companies, kind of unpredictable delivery schedules, political obstacles that, even if you have an MOU that is signed between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, we can't kind of force congressional hands. They're always going to have a role in this. It tends to be those things. Now, I think whatever this MOU contains, I suspect the thing they want it to focus on is going to be to make predictable, reliable U.S. purchases of U.S. defense equipment, because that's what they want to do. We've heard many tales of woe from them about having purchased things, in some cases paid for things, and they get hung up in our political system. That's what they want to address. I'm curious how an MOU addresses that, because there's certain things that an administration can address about the way we administer the FMS program, for example, but that doesn't change the challenges that U.S. industry has with supply chains and production schedules, and it doesn't really change the role of Congress. But nonetheless, I think it has much more to do with those issues than it does simply with competing on price.
Mr. Tolba?
30 seconds on top of that. Ken, great to see you. When I first started doing this 20 years ago, Ken was the person who I respected and admired and wanted to listen to. So thank you for being here. Maybe two very quick things. I was in a conversation with a royal court official not too long ago, and they wanted to just paint in very primary colors exactly what Ambassador Ratney just said. Listen, when it comes to things that are qualitatively important, such as some of the platforms that I presume you're alluding to, the United States is far and away our partner of choice and who we want to be working with. I will go so far as to say I was talking to somebody in the biotech leader that said the exact same thing, and we were talking about maybe the difference between some of the choices that were made during COVID and Saudi's early adoption of U.S. technology, if I can call the vaccine U.S. technology, and how that just reinforced the belief in U.S. innovation and how they wanted to be tied to the United States in anything that had to do with that kind of national security components. And the fact that the defense agreement, for whatever its particulars, as really reaffirming the relationship with the United States, I think is a codification of the red lines that we have been signaling that Saudi Arabia needs to be mindful of when it comes to particular security defense procurements, when it comes to our competitors. Maybe the last thing that I'll say was I was really hoping not to get this question because there's a phrase in the statement from last night that I read way too late and was too bleary-eyed, but I couldn't help but notice that it said and set up a mechanism to help U.S. defense companies to actually sell and operate into the kingdom. I'm paraphrasing, but it said something like that. And the tactical part of me looked at and said, exactly what you just asked. What might that be? I mean, that's a clear recognition that this remains a gap and a determination to start leaning in on behalf of the U.S. government and trying to fill that gap. I'm hoping that the answer to your question is in the implementation of that phrase.
Looking at context to the idea of China has better offering, and I'm saying this as a homeless man. I travel to different cities and different capitals in Asia, and of course the Middle East and Europe. The Chinese tech is very closed ecosystem from engineering standpoint. So think about it as China Inc. They have the finances, they have the human talent, they have the diplomatic muscle of the Chinese CCP. And on top of that, it's always Chinese companies doing all the work. So if you are a country like Saudi Arabia or UAE or Indonesia even, the idea that you'll be part of a Chinese offering or integrate your own, elevate your ecosystem as a partner to China is still not there yet. This being said, China has what I call the scale advantage. We have a scale problem. We cannot really produce anything at scale. It could be great chip design, but good luck trying to produce at scale because we have a scale problem. You see this in EVs, you see this in solar panels. This is not China's problem. China's problem is it's a very close system that if you are a Turkey or Indonesia or Saudi Arabia, integrating yourself in that offering is still tough. On critical minerals, you can be a capital partner. You can be a mining, you can be a processing hub for as a third partner of the United States and a certain country in Africa. On compute, you can basically bring Microsoft or Google or AWS and be a co-locator and a hub for compute as a service. With China, it's how he is going to go set up a data center. It is going to be a Chinese, mining sector fully integrated. So it's very hard for me today to see China playing this role that America is good at, which is we're partners, we can create a role for you that elevates your ecosystem. So there's something to keep in mind. It's not only because America has this lasting relationship, but it's also optimal to work together on some of those technologies.
Stephen Geis, Strafe. In terms of regional security, one country that you didn't mention, I think the Houthis are not a normal actor. And I think the Houthis probably will require intervention, military intervention. Do you foresee Saudi Arabia and the United States at all getting involved in that sort of a cooperation?
Yeah, we have, right? Yeah. On two separate occasions. One, an extensive period in which we were supporting the Saudi-led coalition. That ended with U.S. concerns about civilian casualties, left the Houthis essentially intact. The Saudis sort of, that was the period where they kind of shifted their approach and just started trying to de-escalate these conflicts rather than doing anything that might perpetuate them. That embarked their diplomatic initiative, which was at least de-escalating. It wasn't resolving the problem. It wasn't eliminating the Houthis as a threat, but it was starting to address the threat that it posed to Saudi Arabia. Then after October 7th, it started again, and it became essentially intolerable, right? The Houthis were there targeting commercial shipping. It was having a demonstrable effect on insurance rates for commercial shipping. It was increasing shipping times. Cargo wasn't going through the Suez Canal. It was going around the Horn of Africa. They were starting to try to target U.S. naval vessels. It was getting exceedingly dangerous, and that's when the U.S. once again got involved. Again, they're not normal, right? What you said is correct, but it's also not clear how resolvable it is. It appears that that immediate threat that they were placing on commercial shipping has subsided now that there's a ceasefire in Gaza, but they're largely intact, it seems. And how they're going to be addressed in the long run is a good question. I suspect the Saudi view is going to be, in the long run, they'd rather have some other government there. In the near term, they just need to ensure that they don't pose an immediate threat to Saudi infrastructure and Saudi population centers and airports at a moment where they're trying to attract investment and tourism.
This is going to be the last question, and then we're going to set free those two gentlemen.
Oliver John, this is for Master Ratney. What is the impact you see this having on the smaller GCC states? I mean, the UAE has been ahead in many areas, and is competing with the Saudis for regional infrastructure, the whole line, and other countries are in the gas. And then countries like Kuwait are maybe slowly worried about the political impact. So what do you see as the geopolitical and the economic impact on the smaller GCC states of this closer realignment of the U.S.-Saudi relations?
I mean, there's no reason that it would come at the expense of our relationships with other GCC countries. You know, our goal is good relations, strategic relations with all of the GCC states and with the GCC itself. And there's no reason why an improved relationship between the U.S. and Saudi needs to come at the expense of any of those. You know, if you ask the U.S. Central Command, for example, what do they want? We want to work with all the GCC countries, and we want all of them to work together. And so we spent a lot of time on that. Clearly, there's competition amongst them. There's commercial competition. There's energy competition. There's, in some areas, ideological competition. But honestly, that shouldn't be our problem, right? We all face the same sort of threats. And so what we need is a GCC that works cohesively and the ability to work with all of them together. And honestly, I don't have the sense that where we're going with the Saudis is somehow coming at the expense of our relationship with the Emirates or even Qatar or Kuwait or any of them at this point.
So I kept my last two questions for the two gentlemen. One for both of you. The first one is, what we keep talking about AI, we keep talking about critical minerals. What other industries that we should pay attention to in Saudi Arabia that's emerging and under discussed, and why? Ali?
Space. That's if you kind of look at all of the innovative sectors of the economy, Saudi and the U.S. are collaborating on a good number of them. Space is the one where they are starting to elevate it as a priority in the kingdom and trying to really figure out how to integrate space technology and create the space stack to be part of their not only their manufacturing and advanced tech supply chains, but also data centers and AI. That has also elevated as a principal part of Minister Al-Sawaha's remit, and he spends a lot of time speaking to U.S. companies about that. I think that's the space to watch. I didn't mean to say that.
Ambassador Riley?
It's weird to call it an industry, but education. You know, the Saudis recognize they have a massive human capital shortage, right? These ambitions need to be matched by qualified, ideally Saudis that can do these jobs. They're making huge efforts to reform their educational system. That's a generational challenge, right? Starting from primary school all the way to the university system. They know they have a challenge, and they've set their education minister on the task. In the meantime, they're looking for ways to supercharge that transformation, and they're looking to foreign educational institutions, including, because there's already this affinity, to U.S. educational institutions. So when I was in Riyadh, we spent a tremendous amount of effort on this, and it's continued. I think I'm gratified to know that it's continued to try to build these partnerships between U.S. universities, not just universities, right? Vocational schools, community colleges, all levels of the educational ecosystem to try to help the Saudis supercharge something that would otherwise take 20 years or more to fix. So there's opportunities there. There's opportunities for, including in for-profit organizations that can help them do that, but also certainly in U.S. universities and educational institutions that can partner with them.
This is a very political question. In less than 30 seconds, what's your favorite city in Saudi Arabia and why?
Oh my goodness. I can't answer that.
I don't think I can answer that either.
I mean, you're pulling me into the Najdi Jazzy fight. I got family. I have family in Riyadh. I have family in Mecca. I have family in Jeddah. One of those three. All of those three equally.
Yeah, that's tough.
Okay. So how about this question? So the last question I always end our panels on is, what's your favorite book and why that you recommend to our audience here?
So there's a great book by a former Foreign Service officer named Dave Rundell called Vision or Mirage. He wrote it about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think he's doing an update now. And it's interesting. It's he told me at one point he wrote it as a guidebook for the next U.S. ambassador, which happened to be me. And it walks through all of the sort of divisions of Saudi society, right? You know, the business families, the royal family, the religious hierarchy, the tribes, kind of all these various elements and how it plays historically and how it is embracing these changes that are taking place right now. It's just an extremely clear guide to the country.
Do you mean in the world, or do you mean focused on Saudi Arabia to understand the country?
Both.
I'm going to give you a cheeky answer on the what to read to understand Saudi Arabia. And it's overly cheeky, but I would say Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. And the reason that I give such a strange answer is because when people try to they think about, who does the Crown Prince see himself as? What does he want to achieve in this world? Which leader is he modeling himself after? And of course, the temptation is to make an analogy to some political leader of some sort. He doesn't see himself that way. He sees himself as an absolutely transformational figure, not just for the kingdom, but for the kingdom's ability to influence the global economy. He sees himself as an innovator, a la Steve Jobs, more than any particular leader.
Excellent insight. Well, on this note, first of all, I want to thank MEI leadership, Ambassador Jones. I want to thank the MEI staff, Maheen and Zaina, and everyone who worked on this event. This event wouldn't have been here without them. My colleagues, Matilda and Raquel, who have been a great help to me. And of course, to Ambassador Ratney and Mr. Tolba for your time. I really appreciate your insights. That was an excellent conversation. And the very day we're having this on the second day of the MBS visit means a lot to us. And clearly that was fantastic. And for you, thank you for being here in the room with us. Thank you. Well, that was great. We're going to take a picture with the three of us, and then you're done. You can go to the Kennedy Center.
Are you going to go? I'm wondering whether it's even.
I think it is highly likely to be an exercise in futility. When I left, there was a line of 100 people waiting to get in, and they were doing kind of a one in, one out. So I think it is.
Yeah, my friend just said it's like a madhouse.
I think it's.
Hey, how are you doing, Michael? Nice to see you.
Thanks. I'm gonna get down
Why don't
over
we
here.
take this? Hold on.
Likewise. That was a lot of fun. I know. I think about you a lot, and I wonder how's Ken doing, and I haven't seen you in a couple of years.
I've been focused on some other stuff,
Yep.
not completely
Yep.
ignoring Saudi Arabia, but I started a fintech in Latin America.
Oh
So
my
I spent
goodness.
3 years doing that. and,
Congratulations.
still doing that, so it's cool.
How much time are you here, spending here in Washington? Still, I mean, all the time, I just haven't run into you?
Yeah, exactly. I'm here the whole time.
I would love to get together soon.
Yeah, let's do that.
That would be a
Let's
lot
do
of
that.
fun.
Yeah, let's do it sometime soon. I'm going over to Riyadh in like early December. So either just after I get back.
Just after you get back in the Christmas season, that's a great time to just hang out.
Really good to see you.
Good to see you, Ken.
Good answer on the last one. I really like that.
Yeah.
All your answers were very coaching, of course. I mean, you really know the place well, so.
That, coming from the master, that means a lot to me. I really appreciate it.
This is Sonny Cantrell.
Hi,
He works
Sadie.
with Maxars
How do you do? Good to meet
/Mentor
you.
now.
Very good to meet you. Oh,
Obviously, I'm
so do
Sonny
I have
and I've been
cards?
friends for a long time. I mean, Ali.
in the least. There we go.
I'd never seen Sam from Bloomberg before. He seems like a smart guy.
He is. We spent some time together, like I said, in the Manama Dialogue, and he's really switched on.
Yeah.
Really switched on. I mean, as anybody from Bloomberg typically
Yeah, he does a
is.
good job, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Wonderful to meet you. A real pleasure.
Ollie,
Yeah.
John Lyson.
Hi, John. Good to meet you.
I'm with a group called J&J Real News, as I said
Yeah,
earlier.
no fluff, you said.
No fluff, we're trying to be, straight ahead. I had a question for you, and I hope you don't mind, I'd like to put it on camera, is that okay?
Sure, you bet.
Okay, it's just about, I'll tell you the question before you go on camera, so,
Yeah.
and because you're intimately knowledgeable about Vision 2030.
Yep.
If you could just tell our audience, just a lot of people don't know what Vision 2030 is, where the progress is now and where you see it going in the future. Is that okay?
Yeah, and how long of an answer do you want?
Oh, maybe
30
a
30
minute or so.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be extremely long. Okay. And I'm with Mr. Ali Tulba, who has very kindly consented to answer the question that I was unable to ask during the panel. It's with regard to Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia and where it is, a little bit about it, where it is and where it's going.
So the best way to understand Vision 2030 is
You'll have to speak up to go.
okay.
Sorry.
As best way to understand Vision 2030 is as a a visionary program for the socio and economic transformation of the kingdom. And that sounds so incredibly ambitious, but that really underscores the nature of how much the Crown Prince wanted to achieve. The idea of putting together a program that's written down of where he wants to take the country at the time, 15 years later, in terms of social transformation and remaking the economy